Only true college football nerds are going to remember the name Cole Talley, but came pretty close to etching his mark in college football history and in the memories of Michigan fans forever. We will let you sit on that name for a few minutes, and Michigan fans, you know exactly who I'm talking about. We got Steve Dace on the line from Michigan Podcast to talk up the Wolverines following an overtime triumph over Army 24-21. Steve, how you doing?
Well, I could be a lot better, but I could be a lot worse too, brother. How are you?
I am doing just fine. I appreciate you stopping by to break down the maize and blue. And of course, we're speaking of the Army kicker who lined up for his first collegiate attempt at the Big House with the game on the line, having not defeated a top 10 foe since 1963 for his first attempt in college from 50 yards, no less. And fortunately, it wasn't that close. I think the TV cameras make them look a little bit closer than they were, but reasonably close to sending your beloved off the field with a 1-1 record.
Yeah, God, I'm just going to say it. I think it's already soul-searching time, and I think these next 2 weeks, we could sit here maybe, a year from now, or a little more than a year from now. And these next 2 weeks, we could look back on these next 2 weeks as being determinative on why we're talking about some of the things we're talking about. This offense is an unmitigated disaster. If I had told you before the game, Mark, that Michigan was going to hold Army to 243 total yards, and its worst offensive performance since 2015. If I would have told you they would have done that, what do you think the score would have been, Mark, if I had told you that before the game?
I'm going 42-10 range.
Instead, it was in triple overtime, and Michigan needed a prayer miss field goal, and Army to make some uncharacteristic discipline mistakes in some of their play calling. This is where I get frustrated, because we seem to love the low-lying fruit troll criticism. It's just almost always wrong. Everybody talking about, I thought Don Brown had been practicing since January. Don Brown put on film a clinic that people are going to use in the future of what to do against the service academies, right? At first it looked kind of weird. Most of the time when you play a service academy and you're a big school, you stack the line because you have superior speed and size, right? But then they kind of wait for you to blow a gap and then they gash you. Instead, we kind of played this odd stack look, and we didn't have any tackles for loss until the very end of the game. We didn't give up a lot of big plays either. We kind of kept them in a box, and it was similar to Middle Tennessee State. If the offense had stopped turning the ball over, then, we had them pretty much bottled up. I mean, they averaged 3.3 yards a carry. That's way below what they typically do. Michigan's defense is fine. Despite all the youth and stuff there, it may or may not be as statistically good as a couple of other teams that Don Brown has had here, but they're more than good enough to win a Big Ten championship, particularly in this era of more wide-open offenses. But this offensive thing that's going on, where Michigan had a 27-14 rush to pass ratio in the second half, I want to kill a couple of Twitter tropes now. Shea Patterson might be a little banged up, but he's not injured. If you go back and watch the film of the game, Michigan was not running the kind of running plays that look like zone reads, but are really inside zone. And you always wonder, why didn't the quarterback keep the ball? All right. Blocking the end there on the weak side. These were all zone reads. These were not inside zones meant to look like zone reads, right? We weren't blocking the guy on the end, and our quarterbacks just didn't look to run the entire time. Even though when you go back and look at the film, there's at least 4 or 5 plays where they could have ran. They'd still be running right now if they had. We kept running. Right now the offense we ran in this second half against Army tried to lose the game. We were running Jim Harbaugh's approach of trying to run the ball downhill into a 57-man front on first down, but with Josh Gaddis's formations. So it's hard enough to do that when you're running downhill coming out of an I with a fullback in front of you. or two tight ends, making the defense come to balance. Now we're trying to do this with our running back running horizontally to get the handoff, coming horizontally to get the handoff. That's a half second to square his shoulders to the line of scrimmage. So now you're already behind schedule. And then you're getting it on a delay. Because the whole point of a spread offense, you know this as an Ohio State fan, the point is to force the defense to commit to the gap they're going to cover so that you then attack the other ones, right? So we're now trying to run downhill with delay horizontal formations. And now we got a prized freshman recruit. If I was his dad, I'm like, hey, man, you guys recruited me and said, hey, we monitor the carries of our running backs. We don't want to put mileage on you for the NFL. My kid's coming off a knee scope in the offseason, and in his second game, he's playing 65 snaps because you can't coach anybody else to pass pro. And then you're handing him the ball 33 times for a 3-yard average, which means he's getting just crushed every time he touches the ball because you're running him into these boxes. It's game 2. Pace him, you had him for 2.5 more years. Let's not blow him out here before we get to Halloween. So I don't know what's going on there, but it doesn't look anything at all like what we saw in the spring. And the problem you have is people are kind of just tired of, no one cares about going 8-4 and 9-3 around here. No one does. It's basically compete for the championship. And it looks to me like Shea Patterson is, if you watch the film, there's plays where the pocket is just fine, and he's pulling a John O'Corn where he's just putting his head down and running into the line, no pocket presence at all. I guess Dylan McCaffrey must not be that close to Shea Patterson. Shea Patterson's last 3 games, his QBRs, his high watermark QBR is 52.3 in the last 3 games. 2 of the other ones were sub 50. So they had a lot of issues going on there on offense. Defensively, they're fine. Don Brown did great against Army's triple option. This is the same offense. Last year against Oklahoma, Mark, they put up 380 yards in a double overtime game. This year they put up 243 yards in an overtime game last year. 243 yards in a double overtime game. That possession in the second overtime, you overthrow Nico Collins, who's 6'5", by 10 yards into the third row of the stands. And then you have Tariq Black drop a ball. And then on the third down, you miss Tariq Black by 5 yards to the right. I really think these next 2 weeks and this game against Wisconsin, forget winning it. If they don't look competent on that side of the ball, like they know what they're doing and they're building to something, you can lose that game early and you still got better talent than all the other teams on your schedule until you get to the last game, But if they don't look like they have made, look at the strides Michigan State made week 1 to week 2. If they've got 2 weeks and they cannot get all on the same page, you got offensive linemen throwing their hands up and pointing at each other for jumping off sides. It is an unmitigated disaster. And I don't think it's dramatic when you look at where this fan base is at. We're not in the hot seat. We're in the stuff that happens before you get to the hot seat, if you know what I'm saying, right? Stuff that kind of sets the stage for when the hot seat shows up. We're entering into that arena right now. And I think these next 2 weeks for Jim Harbaugh's program are going to be very determinative. You go up to Wisconsin and you commit all these penalties. They had 7 dropped passes in 2 games, 7 turnovers in 2 games, 10 penalties on offense in 2 games. Go up there and do that against Wisconsin, especially since they're kind of the identity of the program Michigan used to be. And they just, don't have near the athletes you do, but they just out-execute and discipline you off the field. I think this is the time period that if things they end up making a coaching change here after next season, we're going to look back on this 2-week period and say this is where things went off the rails. Or we're going to look back and say this is when they truly, because I don't believe they're fully committed to this. Well, I don't believe Jim Harbaugh is fully committed to this. Let me specify that. All right. And you look at what's going on at LSU, the total team composite ratings at 24/7 Sports have Michigan and LSU very similar in terms of talent. They have a deeply embedded pro-style culture at LSU, and And they've tried, this is their third offense. They tried switching to Matt Canada 2 years ago. That didn't work. They went back to a pro style, and now they're doing this. They don't have a 5-star quarterback. They've played, a far tougher opponent than we played in either of these two games. There are no good answers as to how it is possible that LSU has made this transition that we're trying to make so much better than we have. There's a lot of answers to that question, and all of them are bad, Mark.
You got the jump on the Zach Charbonnet narrative that I wanted to jump on, because 33 carries is one thing, and you alluded to it. 33 carries, if you're gaining 180 or 220 yards, or most of those you're just striding in the wind, flapping your arms because the blocking is so good and you're 18 yards downfield getting pushed out of bounds. But when you're going 33 for 100, that's a lot of linemen smacking into you, and a lot of right when you get the ball getting thrown down in the backfield. So you make a great point about the wear and tear of not just the 33 carries, but the 65 plays and the nature of those carries. You've cited bad play calling based on poor concepts and not being sold and completely buying into the scheme. You're citing Shea Patterson not always looking like an accomplished quarterback who knows what he's doing. You're citing dropped passes. You're citing offensive line issues, which we mostly saw concept and offensive line issues play into the short yardage issues, which again are the nature of this offense if you don't have it fully established and developed.
Yeah, because this is a systemic meltdown, is what you're saying. And now you got to look at the Middle Tennessee game differently too, because you saw these things against Middle Tennessee. The narrative coming out of that, opening game, new offense, fine, but this might be what I'm about to say next is probably my biggest concern of them all. It was pretty clear in the second half when they were faced with mortal danger with the outcome of the game, and Michigan abandoned everything they've spent the entire offseason working on to essentially say, let's just, try to not put our defense in any more terrible situations and see if we can get the hell out of here with a win. And then we'll figure it out with the bye week. I don't fault the coaches for making that adjustment in game. What I fault is, what the hell did you do for the last 8 months? What have you been working on? I mean, what's troubling to me is, at our website for Michigan Podcast, Wolverine Digest, my partner over there, Michael Spath, who does a daily 3-hour show in Ann Arbor, he talked to a couple of football insiders. I've read what football insiders over at the Wolverine, which is the rival site for Michigan, said on their premium page earlier today. And they're all saying the same thing, which is, I don't know what's going on game day. It's nothing what we saw when we were here in camp. We didn't see this all summer long. We didn't see it in the spring. It's like they're going out there in the games and at the first sign of adversity, panicking. That's what I fault. I don't fault putting an offense on lockdown because you're watching it bamboozle its way to a loss and spoiling another outstanding effort by your defense. What I fault is, why do you have to do that? What'd you do for the last 8 months? And that's, I don't know, they're too talented. I think you recognize this. They're too talented to not eventually put up some numbers. But this is about, doing something significant, winning some championships. How does Nico Collins, his final 2 schools were Michigan and Alabama. He was the top prep receiver in Alabama the year he came out. Wonder if he would have gone to Michigan, you would have told him, hey, in game 2 with a 5'9" corner playing you of your junior year, you're going to get 2 targets against a service academy. Think he still would have signed with Michigan? Probably not, So I think they've got fundamental problems they've got to figure out. Number one of which is, what's their identity and what is it they want to do?
On the bright side, they found Ronnie Bell, who looked mighty impressive. You've got that, and
and that's great. He's a nice player, but that's a no-star recruit that you took a flyer on that worked out great. Cool. I'm happy for that. but you're sitting there with Tariq Black that everybody in the country wanted. Nico Collins, everybody in the country wanted. How are you so reliant on and I should say this about Zach Charbonnet, by the way. He's an early enroll, but Mark, he had a knee scope in the offseason. He didn't take part in any spring ball at all. So all spring when they were installing this offense, he wasn't in on any of that. Mark, how is it possible a true freshman who was out for all of the spring is your most reliable offensive player in the second game, given the depth, talent, and experience that Michigan has on that side of the ball? That's another question there are no good answers to.
Do you think it's been a difficult transition for the offensive line from offense to offense?
Well, some of that's injuries. You know, we didn't plan on going into the year with 2 redshirt freshman tackles. Okay, we thought we might have one. They're very high on Jalen Mayfield. I think he would have beaten Andrew Stuber out for that gig, but Stuber blew out his knee, so Mayfield wins it by default. Now John Runyon's had a little something, who's first team all Big Ten, and now you're playing Ryan Hayes, who you weren't planning on playing for another year. You're starting him those 2 games. You're going to get John Runyon back, but that has something to do with it. But Ben Bredesen, your senior All-American, I think there's only been 14 two-time captains in Michigan history. He had 2 pre-snap penalties in the first half at home because, the crowd really gets to you at home in the pre-snap. I mean, Khaleke Hudson, he's our senior captain. He handed Army 2 touchdowns. We had stopped them on a 3rd down. They had overthrown the receiver by 10 yards, and he just panics like a freshman. Oh, no, it's a pass. Grab the guy by the shirt. You're a freaking senior captain. Have some poise. That ball was way overthrown. They were never going to catch that. That's why they called holding and not pass interference. He just panicked like it was his first start in the big house. Later in the game, we've got him stopped on a 3rd down. He lines up offsides almost like he's on the other, and it wasn't like even close. And he's off the ball. He just walks up there. He's almost like on the other side of the line of scrimmage. These are your captains, man. Michigan's best players are Aiden Hutchinson making his 2nd start as a true sophomore, backing up Rashawn Gary and Chase Winovich last year. Zach Charbonnet, who we have already talked about. I mean, really? Where are your senior leaders? Josh Metellus has played great, but Shea Patterson's been dreadful. Khaleke Hudson has done nothing here for 2 years other than make mental mistakes. For that, he's a captain now. I mean, those are your senior leaders. So, if take away those 2 Khaleke Hudson penalties, man, and this is not even a game. And it's easy to be the fan that says, well, they'll clean up those mental errors. There's no guarantee in that. We would have said that last week. I mean, if a guy doesn't know heading into his 3rd year as a starter and who is just elected captain, not to line up offsides on the most pivotal 3rd down of the entire game at that point, I don't know why you think next week suddenly he remembers that. That's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, and concerned because it's like you say, multiple guys that have that much of experience, because if it's one guy or 2 guys, then you just chalk that up to, okay, here's a very talented athlete who's never going to get it. But when it's the kind of guys that you're mentioning on both sides of the football.
Yeah, if it was just one of those guys, you've got enough talent to put somebody else in. But you can't just I bench Ben Bredesen, Khaleke Hudson, Lavert Hill. You can't just bench them all. Shea Patterson, you can't. Well, maybe you could bench him, but it's systemic right now. And there's going to be a point with the talent on this team. There is going to be a point this season where they're going to finally put it all together, and they're going to snowball. The problem is, do they suffer 2 or 3 losses before that occurs? So you're the best Outback Bowl champion, the most talented Outback Bowl champion they've ever had, right? Well, Lottie freaking da. No one around here cares about that anymore. We've done all that. No one cares about how many more games they win and do they finish 10th in the AP poll again. They haven't done anything significant on the field in this program in 15 damn years. 15 damned years. So that's what this is about. And when your coach is out there in Chicago at Big Ten Media Day saying, yeah, I'd vote us the favorite. Okay, cool. I love you owning it. But I need to see that on the field, when you start in the season.
Because it's Michigan, because of what you just stated, yes, that monumental potential upset rings differently than had it been in Happy Valley or Madison, where that's a devastating loss. That's what happened here. But those programs with reasonable expectations of winning a Big Ten championship still just kind of march on, and nobody really pays that much attention, except to say Penn State shouldn't lose to Army, Wisconsin shouldn't lose to Army. But Michigan, had that kick gone through, then, oh my goodness, I don't know what the rhetoric would have been like right now, because it is Michigan.
Can I also say, and I love Kirk Herbstreit, man. All right, I do. But it's not analysis, it's trolling to say on Saturday night, kind of surprised to see Michigan celebrate like that, beating Army. All year long, you guys all predicted this was going to be an upset, Kirk. Everybody had this pegged as a scary trap game. Weren't we just talking about this last week, Mark?
Sure.
Can it be a trap game when you've been saying it's a trap game for 8 months? So this was the game everybody predicted it was going to be, and Michigan still found a way to survive it and win it. What did you want them to do when the game was over? Just politely put their helmets down, casually stroll back to the locker room? I mean, this is what I hate about our industry sometimes. Folks like Donald Trump and programs like Jim Harbaugh's give you all kinds of legit things to criticize. We don't have to make poop up, okay? Just go with the obvious stuff. We don't have to just, and I wonder if sometimes we're just like, the obvious stuff everybody else is talking about this. So let me see if I can find some new angle that no one's come up with yet. I mean, did you watch how Oklahoma celebrated beating Army last year when they held on to win that game? I mean, come on. Not to mention, part of that celebration was the Michigan team going into the corner of the end zone to sing the alma mater with Army as a patriotic gesture, okay? So there's plenty of things to criticize Michigan's first 2 games showing. To criticize a bunch of 18, 19, 20-year-old young men who nearly suffered, who just survived a near-death football experience. Like their season almost ended right there, and they survived it. To criticize them for celebrating at that moment, I just think is really weak sauce.
Yeah, it's different because it's Army. It's different because the one thing that we don't take into consideration on a regular basis after these contests are waged, and we know what the point spread is, and we deal with all the metrics not being in the moment, and we deal with brand name versus brand name or lack of brand name. What those kids on the field are dealing with is another athlete standing on the other side of the line of scrimmage, and all they know is, yeah, that might be Middle Tennessee, or it might be Georgia Southern, or whomever. But man, damn, that kid was pretty good, and that kid was tougher than I thought. And
that kid, by the way, in the Army uniform has the second longest winning streak in college football at that.
Absolutely. And regardless of the uniform that they have on, they just know that they have respect if those kids came after them, and they have respect regardless of what their uniform says. And they're all athletes on the field, and they were fighting for their lives, and they made it. Regardless of what they were supposed to do and what the score was supposed to be, they triumphed over a team and a bunch of guys that they respect.
I couldn't have said it better. And we're talking about an Army team that has the second longest winning streak in college football, returned 10 starters off of last year's first ever 11-win team. It's okay to give them some credit. All right. Now, this should not have been as close as it was. And we started out there. That's why I started there before I went to this point. All right. Michigan showed their physical superiority by holding a well-oiled, disciplined machine to 243 total yards. Its worst offensive output in 4 seasons. That's the most obvious demonstration of Michigan's physical superiority. All right. But it's okay to give Army a little bit of credit for having the second longest winning streak in college football. It's okay to, particularly because they're called Army. So
you get a taste of Michigan football analysis right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, with Steve Deace. Please join him on Michigan Podcast. It is delivered to you at least, once a week, Steve?
Yes. Yep.
Absolutely.
And then we put stuff every day at WolverineDigest.com too.
There you go. I'm going to be fascinated at the clash in Madison against Wisconsin, considering how well oiled a machine they look against inferior foes, but still most teams are not going to beat South Florida. And was it Central Michigan? I get the Michigans confused at times, 49 and 61 to nothing. So Wisconsin seems to have their game together, and Michigan has about 12 days to get their act together.
Well, Wisconsin has the second highest combined scoring margin in its opening 2 games by a Big Ten team in the history of the AP poll era, so since 1936. So Central Michigan was picked pretty much dead last in the MAC. South Florida is now on an 8-game losing streak. But still, when you look at the efficiency numbers they're putting together, it is very difficult not to be impressed. They're going to have a major revenge factor. Michigan dominated them a year ago in Ann Arbor on national television. They also have a bye week, although I don't know that it comes at a good time for them. If I were them, with the way they're playing, I think I'd rather play Michigan this week. You probably would agree with me.
Mm-hmm.
I want to play right now. I don't want to take a break. I'm usually heavily anti-early bye week. It's the first time ever I think a team has needed an early bye week after what Michigan has gone through the first 2 weeks. So Michigan will play better. I just don't know how much better they can play right now. And I could see this being very easily the kind of game that, let's say mid to late October, Michigan starts figuring this thing out and putting it together. And let's say they get through that November gauntlet where they're really hot. I think of a season like 1998 when Michigan started 0-2, losing to Notre Dame and to Syracuse. And the offense with transition and Tom Brady was really a slow starter, and they're figuring out, is it him or Drew Henson? We beat a terrible Minnesota team that year in the Metrodome, like 6-3 or 9-3 or something like that. And I could see this, and at the end of the year, they got hot and then lost at Ohio State at the end of the year. But that's a team that was much better than the Citrus Bowl. They just took too long to gel, and it cost them. I could see this being that kind of a team where, wouldn't it be cruel this is finally the year you beat Ohio State, but because it took you so long to adjust to this new thing, you're sitting at 9-3 instead of going to Indianapolis, right? And I could see this game being that game that they look back on at the end of the year and say, why didn't we figure this out 3 weeks before we ultimately did?
All good points by Steve Deace, Michigan Podcast. Steve, we always appreciate you stopping by. Maybe we can catch up, even though there's not a Michigan game over the weekend. Get your take on week 3 around the nation. All right, Steve, have a good week.
I'd be happy to. You too, man.